Alice in Chains singer Layne Staley definitively made a mark on popular music in his short life, but beyond the songs, he also left his imprint before and after his death.
By the time Layne Staley passed away, the Alice in Chains singer was physically and emotionally crippled by his drug addiction, so isolated that no publicly available pictures exist from this period. This is what the final 12 months of his life were like. According to Guitar World, in 1997, Layne Staley purchased an apartment in Seattle's bustling University District. This would be the singer's home for the next 5 years, leading up to his death. Yet, for the last year of his life, almost no one visited Staley in this apartment, and he rarely left. For the most part, Layne lived an incredibly private and insular life in the year leading up to his death, to the point where the few times people did see him, it was a notable event that they remembered vividly. According to a Facebook memorial post by early collaborator Tim Branham that was reprinted in Alternative Nation, in the end, almost no one could contact Layne. He wouldn't answer the door or take calls. He lived in a condo right smack in front of everyone in the University District. He weighed 80-some pounds, and his health was deteriorating. There were reports that he would go to Toys R Us to buy games and return home, but always by himself. It was well known that Layne Staley was a lover of video games and would often disappear to play games during Alice in Chains recording sessions. In Greg Prado's book, Grunge is Dead, his mother Nancy described him as a video game freak, while Tad Doyle of the seminal Seattle band Tad describes how Alice in Chains would have his band on their tour bus, quote, playing video games and listening to music. However, like many of the things that seemed to make him happy, video games became an escape for Staley, a way to focus his mind on something that didn't wear too hard on his emotions. In a Rolling Stone profile of the band, the writer described Layne disappearing to play games while his bandmates were playing a wild bumper car sport called whirlyball. There's a trope that rock stars overindulging in bad behavior and harmful drugs think they'll live forever. Not Layne Staley, though. By the end of his life, he was not only acutely aware that his drug use had screwed up his whole world, but that he wouldn't be around much longer. In his last interview, months before his death with Argentinian journalist Adriana Rubio, Staley admitted that he knew he was on his way out. He was quoted in the interview, later reprinted by MTV. "I know I'm dying. I'm not doing well. Don't try to talk about this to my sister Liz. She will know it sooner or later. I know I'm near death. I did crack and heroin for years. I never wanted to end my life this way. I know I have no chance. It's too late." Perhaps the most painful thing about this is that Layne's sense of hopelessness drove him to isolate even further and push away even those who loved him. He said in the interview, "I know I did my best, or what I thought would be right. I changed my number. I don't want to see people anymore, and it's nobody's business but mine." Many outsiders looking in at the grunge scene claimed that the movement glamorized drug use, promoting the concept that art and addiction were intertwined via their lyrics and the growing concept of heroin chic that was popular in 90s fashion. But Layne Staley's final interview reveals that he was no longer using heroin for pleasure, but simply because he was so addicted to it that he couldn't possibly stop. He said in an interview published by Blabbermouth, "This drug use is like the insulin a diabetic needs to survive. I'm not using drugs to get high, like many people think." Because of this, Staley was disgusted by heroin's effect on his life, and that he didn't want Alice in Chains fans thinking it was cool, saying, "I never wanted the public's thumbs up about this drug use. My liver is not functioning, and I'm throwing up all the time and my pants. The pain is more than you can handle. It's the worst pain in the world. Dope, sick, hurts the entire body." Perhaps closest to Layne Staley in the 12 months before his death was his mother, Nancy McCallum, who had always been there for her son and helped him seek out treatment for his addiction. Nancy was even working in a treatment center the day Staley died, and it was her intervention that led the police to find the singer's body. According to an interview she did with the Seattle Times, Nancy was working the front desk of a rehab clinic on the day that Layne passed away. She was even planning to meet with one of the supervisors there to map out a new line of treatment for her son. Then, she received a call from his accountant saying that Staley had taken out a large sum of money weeks ago and that no one had heard from him since. Nancy rushed to his apartment, and when Staley didn't answer, she contacted the police. In many ways, Nancy is still haunted by her son's addiction. Addicts and fans send her letters all the time, but she also sees Layne's lyrics on the subject as helpful and prophetic. She said, "That's what his music was about, the life of an addict. He chose to write about it and sing about it and perform about it. It was a warning.
We write about ourselves because we know about ourselves.
As Layne Staley's health deteriorated, he became less interested in being social or recording with his band. That said, the people who saw him deep into his addiction claimed that while Staley looked terrible physically, he was often the same smiling, light-hearted guy they remember. According to an interview with Staley's stepfather Jim Elmer in David DeSola's book Alice in Chains, The Untold Story, Layne seemed to be in high spirits when around others, even toward the end of his life. He was smiling, he was talkative, so there's a good sign that either he was doing better or he was trying to do better, that there's a more hopeful thing as compared to we're going to lose him in 2 days or something like that. Jeff Gilbert, an editor at Seattle music magazine The Rocket, said that when Layne approached him on the street toward the end of his life, he looked bad physically, but seemed aware emotionally. He looked like an 80-year-old version of himself, and it was frightening. He still managed to smile. Every so often, you'd see that little glimmer. As Layne Staley became more and more engulfed by his addiction to heroin, many of those around him began to see him as a withdrawn and tragic figure. But his family has warm and sweet memories from the last time they saw him alive. In a profile on Staley from the Seattle Times, Mother Nancy said that her final memory of her son was him holding his nephew while visiting his family in February 2002. She said, "I saw Layne on Thanksgiving of '01 and again just around Valentine's Day when he came to see his sister's new baby. The last time I saw Layne, and the last picture we have of him, is holding baby Oscar." Sadly for fans, this last image has never been shared with the public. However, Nancy makes a specific point of mentioning that although her son had become withdrawn, he wasn't abandoned by those who loved him. He was never far from the love of his family and friends, who filled his answering machine and mailbox with messages and letters. Just because he was isolated doesn't mean we didn't have sweet moments with him. Layne was actually planning to record guest vocals on a song with alternative metalers Taproot for their 2002 album, Welcome. The band's unique sound, staccato rhythms, throbbing groove riffs, and alternating guttural and harmonized clean vocals made the album pretty perfect for a Layne Staley guest spot. And according to Alice in Chains, The Untold Story, Staley was enthusiastic about recording the vocals, though he asked that producer Toby Wright come alone because he, quote, wasn't looking or feeling great, and he didn't want to be seen. Sadly, Staley's final vocal performance never got recorded, though he was interested in the project right up until his death. According to a statement by former Taproot drummer Jared Montague, Layne's mother told the band that when he died, he had Taproot's demo in his CD player. In 1988, Layne Staley met Demry Perreault, a model who would eventually become a grunge icon. Demry had a look that seemed to define the musical era, beautiful in a small-town way with her bright eyes, round cheeks, and curly hair. According to Alice in Chains, The Untold Story, it was love at first sight. The two soon became engaged, but eventually broke up around 1994. By then, Demry had also become addicted to heroin. On October 29, 1996, she passed away due to inflammation of the heart caused by a previous overdose. When Alice in Chains' first bassist Mike Starr was hanging out with Staley the day before his death, the last time, as far as Staley's friends and family could tell, that anyone saw the singer alive, Layne revealed that he'd seen Demry recently in his apartment. The two were watching the show Crossing Over with John Edward, in which a medium claimed to speak to audience members' dead relatives, when Staley said, "Demry was here last night. I don't give a if you believe me or not, dude. I'm telling you, Demry was here last night." According to The Untold Story, Demry's mother, Kathleen Austin, has heard Mike Starr's story and believes her daughter visited Staley, quote, to be there with Layne as he's doing his transition. Original Alice in Chains bassist Mike Starr spent the day before Layne Staley's death, Starr's birthday in fact, hanging out with the singer at his university district apartment. The interaction was mixed. According to David DeSola's book, Layne was in a sour mood and got into an argument with Mike over his use of benzodiazepine. Perhaps the most tragic part of this was that the bassist, worried by Staley's appearance, tried to call 911 for his friend, but the singer declined. Speaking during a February 2010 episode of Loveline, Mike said, "I was with him all that day on my birthday trying to keep him alive. I even asked him if I could call 911, and he said that if I did, he'd never talk to me again. Of course, I didn't know he was going to die, or I would have called 911 anyways. I'd much rather have him alive and not talking to me than to have lost such a great human being, a great friend, and just a great person." What a great person he was. Layne Staley's official date of death was declared April 5, 2002. However, his body wasn't discovered until April 19th. 2 weeks after the singer had passed away from an overdose of cocaine and heroin. According to Seattle Weekly, police were forced to break down Staley's door after his mother called them to his university district apartment. The scene they found there was a harrowing one. Brown heroin stains leading to the bathroom to the living room, stashes of cocaine and crack pipes around the house, the TV on and flickering. Staley's body was sitting upright on his couch. His 6'1" body weighed only 86 pounds, and in one of his hands was a loaded syringe. A toxicology report found that he had morphine, codeine, and cocaine in his bloodstream. His death was ruled accidental. Layne Staley was the ultimate example of a rock and roll tragedy, a star whose incredible talent and creativity was cut short by an addiction that eventually grew out of his control. But somehow, out of Layne's story grew a bloom of hope for artists in the same position. According to the Seattle Times, shortly after Staley's death, his mother Nancy began receiving donations and letters from fans all around the world struggling with addiction. She was quick to note, "I don't have any magic answers. I just try to console people." She started the Layne Staley Memorial Fund, a way to help those dealing with addiction to pay for treatment services. According to Therapeutic Health Services, which runs the organization, Nancy sees the fund as a means of partnering with Layne on the next step in his work. He was very honest with people about the effects of drug use, urging them not to follow in his footsteps. Those were the messages in his songs, endearing him to his fans.
I think releasing the dark side, releasing depression, frustration is what we're all about.
He was known throughout his adult life as Layne Thomas Staley, but when he was born in the Seattle suburb of Bellevue, Washington in 1967, his parents named him Layne Rutherford Staley. The seeds of change were planted in the 5th grade when he stopped playing the trumpet that his uncle had loaned to him and discovered that he preferred rock music. As his mother Nancy recalled to Northwest Music Scene in 2017, our family friend Fred loaned him a drum set and he loved the drums. He wasn't really into the trumpet, but the drums he loved. And then our neighbor sold him a drum set and he changed his middle name to Thomas. It was the 1980s at the time, and that decade's stable of heavy glam rock bands had fully arrived. And in fact, Thomas was a tribute to one of Staley's favorite hair metal musicians, Motley Crue drummer Tommy Lee. The budding musician also readopted the last name of Staley, as his mother had divorced his father and remarried a man named Jim Elmer, so he was known for some time as Layne Elmer. Long before Layne Staley fronted Alice in Chains, one of the first grunge rock bands ever, he sang in a glam metal outfit called Sleaze. That earlier group was formed by a quartet of classmates at Shorewood High School in suburban Seattle in 1984. Staley joined the band as their singer, and he ended up performing covers of some of his favorite acts of the era, including Motley Crue.
Yeah, we're a hair band.
Sleaze's biggest cultural impact probably happened when they appeared in Father Rock, a movie produced for a Seattle Public Access channel in 1986, with Staley and his bandmates sporting appropriately glam hairstyles and rocking out to an enthusiastic crowd. But that same year, Sleaze was already moving in new directions, including a name switch to Alice in Chains. That's N apostrophe as opposed to the word in. Alice in Chains was driven by a creative partnership between two songwriters who were also very close friends, Staley and guitarist Jerry Cantrell. They met at a party in Seattle in 1987 when Cantrell started talking to Staley, who was basically the center of attention. Cantrell's family had recently kicked him out of his house, but his luck was about to turn around as Staley was willing to take him in at a spot called the Music Bank, a dilapidated warehouse that served as a rehearsal space for several area bands as well as a hangout and flophouse. Cantrell was familiar with Staley's work as the singer of Alice in Chains, and he had introduced himself when he saw the band perform in Tacoma in April 1987. They broke up later that year, around the same time that Cantrell's group Diamond Lies split up as well. Soon enough, Staley and Cantrell formed a new band with a reworked version of an old name, Alice in Chains.
He's my best friend in the world.
In the late 1980s, the drugs of choice for Layne Staley were alcohol, LSD, marijuana, and cocaine. Heroin wasn't widely used in Seattle at that point. It was offered to Staley around that time, but he adamantly turned it down. He preferred cocaine and continued to take it even after a particularly damaging episode. By 1987, his cocaine habit had become so problematic that his bandmates staged an intervention.
Sometimes you have to draw the line and say no.
Staley managed to remain in relatively good health until 1991. During Alice in Chains' first major tour, when they were opening for Van Halen, Staley became dependent on heroin, which had infiltrated the Seattle music scene and left numerous casualties in its wake. He reportedly first tried the powerful opiates on a whim. When his girlfriend Demry Perot unsuccessfully tried to buy cocaine one evening, she returned with heroin instead. She and Staley then both became addicted, and he raved about it so much that his bandmate Mike Starr became hooked as well. Alice in Chains' sound changed around this time as Staley began to write songs about the despair of addiction. Staley treated his own unique vocal abilities as well as the studio as if they were instruments. While recording Alice in Chains' second album, Dirt, he utilized a strategy that he called stacking vocals. Without outlining his idea to producer Dave Jordan beforehand, he would lay down a vocal track and then repeat. As Jordan recalled to The Atlantic, he would just say, "Give me another track, I want to double it, now let's triple it." He was telling me what he wanted to do, and we'd do it. After hearing a playback of the lead-off track, Them Bones, Staley improvised and quickly recorded an idea where he'd wail in time to the guitar melody. And on the song Godsmack, it might sound like some studio tricks were used to provide echo, vibration, and volume variation on his vocals, but he actually pulled it off with his voice naturally, and he wouldn't let anyone in the studio see how he did it, instead recording from inside a private enclosure. Alice in Chains' 1991 hit song Man in the Box has generally been interpreted to be about how bad it feels to be stifled, restricted, or held back, common themes in rock music. But it's actually more specifically about the mass media silencing certain unsavory voices. Or at least that's what it was initially about when Layne Staley began to assemble the lyrics. As he told Rolling Stone in 1992, "I started writing about censorship. Around the same time, we went for dinner with some Columbia Records people who were vegetarians. The label reps proceed to school Stanley on the procedures used to raise veal, like enclosing cows and stifling fattening pens that are often considered abusive and inhumane. The singer then couldn't get what he'd heard off his mind. As he recalled, "I went home and wrote about government censorship and eating meat as seen through the eyes of a doomed calf."
Plus, I was really stoned when I wrote it, so it meant something different then.
Both of the chief creative voices in Alice in Chains, Layne Staley and Jerry Cantrell, had previously been involved in other musical projects. Cantrell had sung in his school choir, but he didn't feel comfortable singing in Alice in Chains, even on the songs he wrote, until Staley encouraged him to do so. As he recalled to Guitar World in 2009, "Layne was really responsible for giving me the confidence to become more of a singer. He'd say, 'You wrote this song, this means something to you, sing it.' He kicked my ass out of the nest." Staley needed a similar boost to get out of his own wheelhouse. He occasionally played guitar, but not without a lot of prodding. Rage Against the Machine guitarist Tom Morello was particularly inspirational to him. As Cantrell revealed on Morello's podcast, Maximum Firepower, he wanted to play guitar more and he was kind of intimidated because he didn't play that much guitar, but he really was turned on by how you played guitar. And so Staley ended up originating some of Alice in Chains' most memorable guitar melodies, including the riffs for Angry Chair, Hate to Feel, and Head Creeps.
Something you do is kind of hard to listen to and step aside from it and stand back and appreciate it.
Despite numerous physical ailments over the course of his career, Layne Staley rarely missed a show. If a concert was on the schedule, he'd show up and sing no matter how he was feeling. In September 1992, Alice in Chains played the Oklahoma State Fair in Oklahoma City, which offered Staley plenty of space to goof around. Alas, while riding in a recreational vehicle, he managed to drive over his own foot. He ended up with some broken bones, but he refused to cancel or reschedule any of the additional dates left on his band's tour. As he insisted at the time, "I didn't break my neck, so there's no excuse not to play."
Ozzy was watching from his dressing room window when Layne ate it, and he said that's one of the most funniest things he's ever seen in his life.
Staley employed a variety of tools to make things easier while performing injured, including crutches, a wheelchair, and a couch where he could lie down. At one Alice in Chains show in Oakland, California, he even jumped into the audience and crowd surfed, despite his foot being in a cast. Staley's injuries were immortalized by the tour's official t-shirt, which bore the image of an x-ray of his injured foot. If you're not a devoted student of 90s rock music, you might think that Nirvana brought grunge to the mainstream and replaced the popularity of hair metal practically overnight. But that's not exactly how it went down. Instead, the genre emerged gradually thanks in large part to Alice in Chains, which was co-founded by former metalhead Layne Staley. The first album, Facelift, was released in 1990, and by spring of the following year, the hard-edged single Man in the Box was rising up the charts and receiving regular airplay on MTV. Predating Nirvana's rise by about 6 months, Man in the Box was the first hit grunge single. By 1994, grunge had become the coolest kind of rock around. That year, Alice in Chains released Jar of Flies, a half-length record consisting of just 7 songs. It debuted at #1 on Billboard's album charts, the first time that a shorter record known as an EP or extended play pulled off that feat.
Let me tell you something, Alice in Chains are nutty guys.
In 1994, Alice in Chains enjoyed its most commercially successful year ever as Jar of Flies debuted at #1 and generated 3 hit songs, No Excuses, I Stay Away, and Nutshell. But under the weight of all that success, the band was collapsing, albeit briefly and secretly. That summer, Alice in Chains pulled out of a planned tour with Metallica and canceled their appearance at the Woodstock '94 festival. A statement issued at the time vaguely attributed the hiatus to medical issues, but Alice in Chains had actually split up, they just hadn't announced it publicly. As guitarist Jerry Cantrell later told Rolling Stone, "We had been way too close for too long and we were suffocating. We We were like 4 plants trying to grow in the same pot. The breaking point arrived when Staley finished a stint in a drug rehab clinic and then attended a band practice while intoxicated. Drummer Sean Kinney swore to never collaborate with Staley ever again. Nobody in the band spoke to each other for 6 months, and Staley soon realized how much he missed having Alice in Chains in his life. As he admitted, "At first I was dumbfounded. I just sat on my couch staring at the TV and getting drunk every day." Sometimes celebrities are declared dead when they're still very much alive. Such an unfortunate fate befell Layne Staley in 1994 when Alice in Chains was in the middle of a lengthy break. The group announced that health problems led them to pull out of a tour, and around the same time there were rumors that Staley was privately dealing with a heroin addiction. That all exploded into a notion that he'd been diagnosed with a serious illness or even passed away. As he recalled to Rolling Stone a couple of years later, "I found out through the internet that I have AIDS. I learned I was dead. Where else would I find out these things? I was in San Francisco at Lollapalooza and this girl walked up to me and stopped like she'd seen a ghost. And she said, 'You're not dead.' And I said, 'No, you're right. Wow.'"
The nature of the beast is always present at these shows, which is cool.
But the rumors were understandable. In the late 90s, Staley stepped away from the public eye while nursing a serious drug addiction. The majority of his teeth fell out, and the use of IVs left his arms riddled with abscesses. This all led to another legend about Staley, that his arm had become so infected with gangrene that it had to be amputated. By the mid-90s, Staley's mental health had deteriorated to the point that he considered suicide. After surviving a few attempts at ending his own life, he was pulled out of that despair by a fear of the unknown, as well as some profound, unexplainable experiences. As he admitted to Rolling Stone in 1996, "I'm scared of death, especially death by my own hand. I'm scared of where I would go." Staley claimed that he saw the afterlife and that it looked bleak and painful for someone like himself. As he put it, "I was lucky enough to get a glimpse of where I was going to go if I did follow through with it. It makes me sad for my friends who have taken their lives because I know that if your time is not finished here and you end it yourself, then you gotta finish it somewhere else." On one occasion, Staley blacked out and felt himself being transported to a horrible place. As he recalled, "I had no control over my muscles and it scared the out of me because I experienced what I guess could have been hell or, purgatory or whatever. It was freezing cold and I was spinning like I was drunk and trying desperately to take a breath." Layne Staley never really had a career as a solo act, though he occasionally branched out from his main gig. He saved the vast majority of his creative efforts for Alice in Chains, though he took advantage of their hiatuses to collaborate with other musicians. In fact, he teamed up with other famous rock stars to form a couple of supergroups. Their outputs weren't very prolific, but they were memorable. In 1994, Pearl Jam guitarist Mike McCready met bassist John Baker Saunders at a Minnesota drug rehab center, and they asked Screaming Trees drummer Barrett Martin if he wanted to join a side project. McCready then brought in his friend Layne Staley to be the singer, and they played a few gigs as the Gacy Bunch after serial killer John Wayne Gacy. They eventually settled on the name Mad Season, and in 1995 they released their only album, Above, which featured the hit songs River of Deceit and I Don't Know Anything.
It's a tough record to hear sometimes because it's Layne kind of chronicling where he's going.
4 years later, Staley led another alt-rock supergroup called Class of '99, which came together to cover Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 for the soundtrack of the sci-fi horror movie The Faculty. With Staley on vocals, the band also included Rage Against the Machine guitarist Tom Morello, Jane's Addiction drummer Stephen Perkins, Porno for Pyro's bassist Martin Lenoble, and Collective Soul bassist Matt Serletic. In the late 90s, Staley's physical health was declining due to years of heroin use, though he still managed to show up for his final performances with Alice in Chains in 1996, but it didn't exactly go very well. Instead of putting together a full-fledged tour or promoting their self-titled 1995 album, the band played stripped-down, mostly acoustic versions of their songs on an episode of MTV Unplugged. Most fans and reviews actually praised the performance, but Staley struggled to get through it. As Jerry Cantrell recalled during a concert in 2018, "Funny story, we did the Unplugged in New York and Layne kept up Sludge Factory. We did it like 8 times. He blew the same thing in the second verse." Staley also messed up again in the take that was used on the show, as he can be heard dropping an F-bomb at the troublesome parts of Sludge Factory.
We're allowed a couple of those. It's been a while.
Alice in Chains wasn't planning on hitting the road at that point, but then Stone Temple Pilots dropped out of their slot as the opening act for Kiss, after their frontman Scott Weiland went into rehab, and so Alice in Chains signed on for their first full concerts in 3 years. They played in Detroit, Louisville, and Kansas City without incident, but after the third show, Staley overdosed and had to go to the hospital to recover. His band had to abandon the tour, and they never played live with him again. After opening for Kiss in June 1996, Alice in Chains went on an extended break. They didn't reconvene for more than 2 years, when they went into a Los Angeles studio in August 1998 to record 2 new tracks for a career-spanning box set. But Layne Staley's behavior turned that relatively simple plan into something monumentally difficult. When it came time to finish adding vocals to the nearly completed songs, Staley bailed, claiming that he needed to return home to Seattle to go to his sister's wedding. Relations had already grown strained between Staley and Jerry Cantrell after the singer kept altering a melody and some lyrics written by Cantrell. At one point, Staley reportedly denied having ever sung his bandmates' words, a patently false claim. Sessions were rescheduled, but it was obvious to his bandmates and the production staff that Staley was deep in the throes of drug addiction. As producer Dave Jordan recalled to Rolling Stone, he had lost a lot of weight and he looked white as a ghost. However, the songs that Staley contributed to, Died and Get Born Again, did make their way onto the compilation. They would be the last material he would ever record with his band. Rock stars and tattoos often go hand in hand, and Layne Staley is certainly one of the most notable examples of that connection. Just after he turned 21 in 1988, he went out drinking in Seattle with Jerry Cantrell. They commemorated the night and their friendship with some matching ink, with skulls on Staley's left arm and Cantrell's right arm. While Cantrell's skull features bulging eyes and an exploding brain, Staley's was a bit friendlier, sporting sunglasses and an Elvis Presley-style hairdo. Cantrell later referenced their tattoos on the song Sea of Sorrow, which he wrote for Alice in Chains' 1990 debut album Facelift. It contained the lyric, "You opened fire, aim my smiling skull at you." Staley eventually went back under the needle for another tattoo in the form of a striking image of a Christ-like figure with his eyes sewn shut on his back. It strongly resembles a character featured at the end of the music video for Alice in Chains' first big hit, Man in the Box.
It's the best.
During his stint as Alice in Chains frontman, Staley generated and acquired a lot of unique and priceless memorabilia, but where it all ended up now is a mystery. In the late 90s, Staley gifted a stack of his handwritten lyric sheets and original artwork to his friend, Seattle musician Ron Holt. Holt later claimed that he lost these items, which were estimated to be worth something in the four-figure range. But then, in 2016, he attempted to sell on eBay a tape of himself and Staley playing in a band called 40 Years of Hate. According to Alice in Chains, the Untold Story author David DeSola, when Staley's family was sorting through the musician's personal effects following his death, they found that his storage units had been burglarized. Many items disappeared forever, though his estate did manage to purchase back other items from people who claimed without proof that Staley meant to give them those items. The Linwood, Washington Police Department did manage to recover Staley's MTV Video Music Award the day that his death was announced. For more than a decade, the most notable missing items from his collection were his personal journals. In 2025, Simon & Schuster announced that those papers would be published, although they didn't reveal how they had acquired those materials. Layne Staley never got married, although he was engaged once. Despite that lack of a spouse, he did enjoy the company of a constant companion in the final years of his life in the form of a cat named Sadie. She started living with the musician in the mid-90s until his death in 2002. And it was actually Sadie's odd behavior that made Staley's mother Nancy realize something was wrong. When Nancy stood outside her son's home on April 19, 2002, she noticed Sadie's uncharacteristic meowing, which convinced her that she needed to call the authorities for help getting into the condo. After Staley died, Sadie needed a new caretaker, and she found one in her previous owner's former bandmate, Jerry Cantrell. He took Sadie to his Oklahoma ranch, and she even appeared on Cantrell's episode of MTV Cribs later that year. She died in 2010 at the age of 18.
She's a pretty good cat.
Layne Staley and the music he made with Alice in Chains meant a lot to a lot of people. After his death in 2002, tributes started pouring in from his colleagues and admirers. Billy Corgan of Smashing Pumpkins wrote in a statement, "Layne had an amazing voice that had such a beautiful, sad, haunting quality about it. He was different because his heaviness was in that voice." And Soli Erna of Godsmack admitted, "He was single-handedly the guy that got me to start singing. To this day, I've never really heard a cooler singer." Eddie Vedder wrote the Pearl Jam song 42002 for his late friend, while Stained and Black Label Society both recorded songs called Layne. Plus, James Hetfield has revealed that parts of Metallica's 2008 album Death Magnetic was inspired by Staley. 17 years after his death, Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin declared August 22, 2019 Layne Staley Day, as that would have been his 52nd birthday. The event included a memorial meeting at the city's International Foundation and a performance by an Alice in Chains cover band. Following Staley's death from an accidental overdose, former Alice in Chains bassist Mike Starr revealed that Staley had once saved his life after Starr overdosed. Starr was dismissed from the band in 1993 due to his substance abuse issues. Just before leaving the band, Starr and Alice in Chains played the Hollywood Rock Festival in Brazil alongside Nirvana. During the trip, Starr spent several hours injecting heroin in a bathroom with Nirvana frontman Kurt Cobain and Cobain's wife Courtney Love. Then he joined Staley for another round of the powerful opiate. In 2010, Starr told Dr. Drew Pinsky, "I went to Layne's room, we shot up, and I OD'd." Starr couldn't remember what happened after that. Staley told him that he'd stopped breathing and didn't have a pulse, and so he tried to revive him by striking him and placing him under a shower. Starr regained consciousness and learned that, according to Staley, he'd been technically dead for a total of 11 minutes. The bassist believed that Staley's actions brought him back to life. Sadly, in 2011, Starr died of a drug overdose. After Mike Starr was fired from Alice in Chains, bassist Mike Inez joined the band. That fall, Alice in Chains played a series of shows in Japan, and Inez later revealed that Staley took the opportunity to explore some alternate career options. During the 2010 Alice in Chains reunion tour, Inez told Revolver that while they were in Tokyo, Staley disappeared during a hiatus between shows. And after a few days, we couldn't find Layne anywhere. We were just like traveling the streets of Tokyo, looking in all the bars for him. They eventually gave up and went into a bar they'd been told was frequented by models. And that's where they found Staley, who said that he just wanted to feel like a regular guy for a while, according to Inez. True story, there's Layne blowing fire behind the bar and being a bartender. So he got a job at a bar for a couple of nights, just to tend bar, and didn't even really tell people who he was. In 1996, Staley's one-time fiancée Demery Perot died from a heart condition related to drug use. That same year, Alice in Chains went on a hiatus, in part due to Staley's declining health, and the singer retreated into a Seattle apartment almost permanently. He would send employees to buy him the illegal drugs to which he was profoundly addicted. But in 2010, Cantrell revealed in the book Alice in Chains, The Untold Story, that Staley never stopped making music. He said, "I'd go over to his place and he'd be playing me, be writing all the time. I would too. He'd play me stuff, I'd play him stuff, vice versa." In 2016, plans were announced regarding a collection of 8 previously unheard Staley songs, but so far they haven't been officially released. Staley's drug use was well known, particularly when he was leading Alice in Chains. Many of the band's songs were about substance use and abuse, and their lyrics reflected Staley's real-life experiences. But in 1996, he told Rolling Stone that he had serious regrets. "I wrote about drugs and I didn't think I was being unsafe or careless by writing about them. When I tried drugs, they were great, and they worked for me for years, and now they're turning against me, and now I'm walking through hell, and this sucks." According to Staley's mother, the musician nearly died from overdosing 5 times prior to his fatal OD, only surviving on those occasions because other people were there and saved him. But what fans didn't know until after his passing is just how hard Staley tried to get clean and sober. He enrolled in drug treatment facilities on 10 separate occasions, but sadly, none proved to be effective in the long term.